What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video on character creation as part of the Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader beta that is launching today, which I was given a bit of early access to thanks to Wh40k Games, but in this particular video I want to specifically talk about character creation and what is available in the beta, because luckily, compared to the rather overwhelming systems at play in Wrath of the Righteous, I think people will be able to get to grips with this system much faster, and making a character is relatively easy. But I want to dive into the specifics of that, talk about what's here, what is not here, and what you can expect, and just to kind of see how things are shaping up at the same time ahead of the release. First and foremost, we have an option to either create our own main character or take one of three preset options. The presets are just predefined characters that occupy one of a couple different roles, such as fighter, adept, basically just kind of covering your bases as far as the classes go. But I imagine most people, myself included, will want to create that custom character. This starts with picking a portrait as well as your physical appearance. Now the portrait, there are a few finished portraits to work on. I don't know if there's more coming here. There likely will be, but it's hard to say. It's my understanding from Wh40k directly that getting these made is actually very expensive, but what I imagine a lot of people will do, as is the case with many CRPGs, is use their own. That is an option here. Works the same way as the others. You just put your custom picture in the portrait folder in the game files and you'll be able to use it. Now when it comes to your actual appearance, this is a part that I'm not sure is actually finished just yet, which is simply because the options that are on display are mostly just all options that we had in the Pathfinder games, with a few unique things in terms of like hairstyles and extra little effects on our body, like the tubes and plates that are typical of this setting. But I would not be surprised if this was not everything we're getting in that regard. They do have a decent amount of physical customization for your actual in-game model as well. Though with this being an isometric game, you won't be seeing a ton of that up close anyway outside of a menu. And in fact, if you're familiar with their Pathfinder games, many of these are just brought directly over from there, which isn't a huge surprise. But after we get all of that sorted out, our first big choice in terms of defining our character is picking our home world. What kind of world were we born on, or were we born out in space? A few of these have multiple options, such as the Forge world and the Imperial world, but this is a pretty important choice. It's going to affect your base stats to some degree, but do know that some of these are not finished currently. We see that with the ones more towards the end, and that's important because one thing I've noticed playing the beta is that there are some items in the game that will actually only let you equip them if you are from a specific world in terms of your background. And while that wasn't a huge factor in much of my playtime thus far, it will be a thing, I imagine. But again, many of these actually aren't finished completely. Some of them don't give drawbacks at all, whereas some of them do. Some of them actually give you extra features. But for the most part, what to know here is that your home world is going to affect some base attributes modifiers, as well as some equipment for sure, and I believe a few dialogue options, but I haven't seen a ton of that. Next up though, we have our occupation. For those unfamiliar with the system of rules this game is actually based on, your career and abilities are combinations of your occupation and your actual career. Your occupation is more like a background for your character than it is an actual class, so that's something to keep in mind. However, we do see here that we can play as a sanctioned psyker, and we can pick between divinator or biomancer. Now, we can also pick a few others, such as being a navy officer, a noble, a criminal, that kind of thing. This is also a really big choice, though. This is going to give you abilities to use in combat, as well as affect your base attribute and skill modifiers. And if you couldn't see on screen, it will also determine your sort of default outfit as well. Moreover, as you level up and advance, what you pick here in your occupation will actually give you extra options as you level up as well, such as if you pick a psyker, you'll be able to increase your psi rating and get access to more and more powers as you go, and things like that. Your occupation will affect your level ups on top of just being your background. So it's a sort of key component into what your class winds up being. But that brings us to our Triumph and Darkest Hour. Unfortunately, neither of these are fully implemented, so it's hard to say exactly what they have in mind here. But if I had to guess, this will likely be some sort of perk or drawback system, potentially both, with it being Triumph and Darkest Hour. But safe to say these are likely going to be something that allows us to define our character much further in terms of their background, what they're good at, etc. But as it stands, Triumph and Darkest Hour are not ready in character creation. But that does bring us to our careers. Careers are also not fully implemented, which is to say what you see here is not everything. There will be more. This is actually the same as it was in the alpha, but we simply have a cleaner UI now. First up though, we pick one of 4 sort of base classes, and then when we hit level 15, we'll be able to specialize into one of an advanced class. Careers are where our primary combat ability is going to come from. Fighters tend to focus on melee things. Leaders tend to direct other people in combat, both buffing and debuffing enemies or giving people extra turns even. Adepts are great at weakening defenses and buffing everyone. Soldiers are great with ranged weaponry, and then each one of these can spec into an advanced class, which is typically more damage, straight defense, or group support, that kind of thing. But this is mostly what we saw in the alpha, just presented a little more cleanly. But we do know for a fact that there will be more of this coming, that these are not the only options we'll have to choose from in the final version of the game. And as it stands, much of our combat ability is going to be determined by what we picked in our occupation as well as our careers. Lastly, though, this does bring us to the stats portion of it. Now, we will be given 30 points with which to work, but we have to spend them in units of 5. We spend these on our attributes specifically, and then they will affect our derivative stats on the right here, and you can see which attribute corresponds to which skill, and for the most part, it's the things you would expect. Probably the biggest thing to know, though, is if you're wanting to play a psyker, what you need is willpower, not intelligence. The rest of it's pretty straightforward. Weapon skill is melee, ballistic is ranged, the usual suspects. For the most part, lean into the things you want your character to be good at and you'll be good to go. Now, as you level up, your class will only be able to level up certain things that class is supposed to be good at in increments of 5 for your attributes or 10 for your skills. And because of that relatively small pool of things to choose from as you level up, which is then augmented by picking up things like extra abilities based on your career or your occupation, defines much of the level up experience. But because of the way that's set up, it's hard to make a character that is, I would say, unviable without almost deliberately trying to. Because the game sets you up to focus on a few different things, which I think, given the relative simplicity of this compared to something like Pathfinder, is going to make for an easier time for most people. So, while this is hardly a final piece of work, it is, I think, a huge step in the right direction as far as character creation goes, and I think it's looking pretty good. However, before we leave, the last thing you'll do in character creation is name whatever you want your ship to be before checking out a summary of everything you chose, as well as the abilities and things you'll be granted as a result of those choices before jumping into the game proper. Overall though, again, liking what I'm seeing here. I'm especially excited to actually see the full and final product, as I think a lot of my enjoyment of this is going to depend upon the addition of missing things, as this is a little bare bones, but it's definitely moving in the right way. All of that said, I hope you enjoyed this video and the early look at character creation in Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.